if the spiral of silence is probably the biggest contributor to that 82% that are leaving, how do we turn this around? How do we make it better?
Boy, I got to walk a tightrope here. I think that there's a real issue with the church. We've kind of had this button-down, white shirt, tie kind of culture that says one of our highest values is being nice.
I want to know if we've identified the problem being the spiral of silence. Like, what is the fix? Like, how do we turn this ship around? Because if we don't, what? Are just all millennials just going to go inactive? Is it going to be me and Brad? Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to Midnight Mormons. I'm your host, Cardinellis, and today I'm joined in the studio by two friends, both Brad Whitbeck and Greg Matsen of Quick Media. And Greg has actually been a longtime friend of the show. And interestingly enough, if I actually look at a lot of our analytics, both on streaming platforms and on YouTube, I share a bigger chunk of my audience with a bigger chunk of your audience than any other show out there on the streaming platforms. So I thought it was time that we meet, you know, and you were going to talk a little bit about avoiding the, quote, spiral of silence in Mormonism, aka the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So, Greg, without any further ado, could you just introduce yourself, tell us about who you are, and just show a little bit so my audience gets to know you, and then we'll talk about how we can avoid the spiral of silence in the church, man. So hit it. Take it away.
Yeah, so I'm Greg Matsen. I run a small company called Quick Media. We have Quick Show, which is a podcast that we focus on gospel issues and we focus on cultural issues, but primarily cultural issues these days. Mm-hmm. And just talking about what is going on in the church culturally. And one of those things is the spiral of silence right now. And just, you know, I get a lot of feedback on the videos that I do on these cultural issues, and we try and hit some pretty controversial things, a lot of things that others are not going to touch. And the feedback oftentimes is on one of two sides. Wow, somebody's actually speaking up about this, someone's saying something. And then on the other side, this is very uncomfortable for me, right? It's like, this is uncomfortable. Why are you saying this? Everything just needs to be left to the prophet, and right, we don't do anything unless there's something that's said.
You too, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a real issue with the church. We've kind of had this button-down, white shirt, tie kind of culture that says one of our highest values is being nice. One of our highest values is politeness.
Yeah.
And those are both good things.
It's what we've been known for 50 years, and it's worked so far. So let's keep doing it. Don't rock the boat.
Yeah, it's not working, right? It's not working.
It's also,
and niceness to me actually is like just a neutral. In fact, I've said it oftentimes. I don't think niceness is a virtue at all.
No,
right?
It's not part of the gospel at all.
No, in fact, if you listen to the general authorities at General Conference, they never use the term nice. They always use the term kind or kindness.
Yeah.
They stay away from nice. And so that's more of a culture thing. As you know, as water runs downhill, it comes down to the wards. We end up with this very nice virtue that we think is a virtue, and it's not. And then you get the talk, you know, I think it was from President Nelson last year in General Conference, which was, you know, get rid of contention. What are you going to get rid of in your life with, what type of contention are you going to get rid of? And that's a great thing to do. It's a good objective. Mm-hmm. But there's a very big difference between contention and conflict. If the world is moving toward in a direction that is not good, right, and the church is supposed to stand for something different and stay out of Babylon, so to speak, there's no way you can avoid conflict if you're going to stand up for what is right.
Yeah.
It's impossible. And if you're uncomfortable with conflict, you're going to have a tougher and tougher time as we go into, sailing into the latter days here.
Yeah. And I would even say that I think niceness a lot of times fuels later conflict, and fuels later contention. Because if you're just being nice and you're not really saying what you mean, you can only do that for so long before you end up getting to the point that you're like, no, I've really got to say what I want to say now, right? And so I think a veneer of niceness where you're not being true and you're not saying what you actually mean because you're worried about offending other people, you're not doing either you or the person you're trying not to offend a favor, you know?
No, it's niceness is too often avoidance.
Mm-hmm.
And niceness is too often kicking the can down the road.
As a Canadian, I totally understand this.
So what are some of the ways, like what are some of the
Wait, you're a Canadian?
I know. I repented as quickly as
I don't think I know any Canadians.
Oh, you do now?
Dude, no, it's my favorite national park. You got to go there and meet them. It's like, don't we pay you to like wear those hats? Or is that, they call you Mounties or mountain people or something like that? Okay. Anyway, okay, so how do you think this whole substituting niceness for kindness is hurting us most? Because we've actually talked a lot about that on our show. I believe sometimes disabusing somebody of a bad self-destructive narrative can be more kind than entertaining that narrative to a point of self-detriment. Do you think that's where we've gone? Like, I've heard you mention this spiral of silence on your show, and it seems like it actually came from some kind of epic realization. And I'm just trying to get to the root of what was that realization and like, what's the story of that term? Because I'm loving it. The spiral of silence.
I'm not sure. The spiral of silence, I think, is a term that is used somewhere in academia. And I think Jonathan Haidt grabbed onto it.
Yeah.
And started using it in his books. So I think that's kind of the DNA of where that's coming from.
By the way, Jonathan Haidt is the most hilarious thing to read because he's like the Apostle Paul to liberals. He literally is just a conservative. Like he comes out and he says, you know, if you tell your children that they have peanut allergies and you don't expose them to peanuts, it'll actually worsen the allergies over time. And see, we have studies that show you actually need to expose them. And I think just because he doesn't wear a plaid shirt and sound kind of gruff, when he says all of these like hyper conservative truths, people are like, oh, well, he's kind of lispy. So, you know what I'm saying? Like,
oh my God.
He's got to be, you know, he's got to be sensitive.
He's a classical liberal. He's like Bill Maher, right? That's the same kind of thing where these guys are like there are some on the left that are seeing what is happening with wokeness. And they're like, what in the world? This is not what I grew up with. This is not what I believe. This is illiberal, not liberal. And I think Jonathan Haidt is one of those guys. He's saying, I want nothing to do with this. He's an atheist. So is Bill Maher. They're total atheists, but they're not going down that road. And so there is a certain portion of the demographic that is saying, that on the left is saying, we want nothing to do with this. And now we have no home.
Okay, so I'll tell you this right now, dude. As a millennial, I think we were the first generation that was screwed by the spiral of silence. I think all kinds of political problems, social problems, and spiritual problems, those bucks were passed the boomers and the Gen Xers and landed in our laps. And all the time people say, gasp, 75% of millennials are leaving. And they act as though it's some kind of defect in our DNA.
82%.
Or fine, 82%. Whoa. Like whatever it is. And you know, you hear all these boomers bemoan it at church as though there's something wrong with us. And to a certain extent, I think, you know what, guys? Like, I've seen you call the exact same people over and over again. We refuse to adapt to new social media. I can't take a nice, well-prepared PowerPoint presentation on my laptop with an HDMI out port and go in and plug in for an elders quorum meeting to give a good lesson that I prepared on my laptop. I'm still expected to go look up in some kind of Rolodex. Oh, I need printout of poster number A52 of Nephi with his armbands. You know what I'm saying? Like in a big giant 8x12 that half of the semi-blind people in the back row still can't see. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like, I feel like sometimes this is a church for boomers and by boomers, and that they just, until they all die, we won't be allowed to modernize. So it's just like, I think in many ways our church needs to modernize, not necessarily socially and doctrinally. Our values need not shift, but like, I don't.
But wait a minute, you're talking about technology, but you started with a social issue. You're saying that this is a church for the boomers, by the boomers. That's not just technology, right? If it wasn't
done in the 80s, they don't think it should be done. And I've noticed, as the leadership of the church has drastically aged, the programs that they benefited from, they've completely let go because they're not using them anymore. The Boy Scouts, gone.
Well, that's another point for sure.
Regional athletics, gone. Now our church has like atrophied into this, take the manual home and just do come follow me from home, which may work for you, but are we going to throw literally a preach my gospel manual in the lap of a single mother? I was the child of a single mother. If not for the church and amazing people who were morally obligated to come home teach once a month. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. There was men who checked that there was food in my mother's fridge. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And things like that. I'd be in a prison somewhere. You know what I'm saying?
And Cardin, I don't think...
And they don't do any of that crap anymore.
But they do if your ministers are doing it right.
Yeah, come on, really. Yeah. Are you going to throw that Preach My Gospel book into the lap of a single mom who's already overwhelmed and say, well, if you do it right, your kids won't end up in prison?
No.
Or does there need to be a robust and overwhelming program
I'm not saying if the single mom is doing it right. I'm saying if the ministers are doing it right. I think a lot of your complaints about this sort of stuff is that the structures have changed in some way. But in a lot of ways, it's our personal responsibility to be loving our neighbor.
And I don't mean to make the personal responsibility versus communal responsibility argument. What I was just saying is that the spiral of silence, I think, is a great term. And oftentimes us millennials get treated as though we're some kind of rejects that are just like too lazy to work, feel entitled to everything, so on and so forth. Yet I look at the system, I'm like, it doesn't surprise me that a bunch of millennials leave, not just for CES litters, but because they also just kind of feels like this isn't a church for them. It's a church for older people.
Why though? What? I mean, how does spiral of silence affect that? Why isn't it a church for the millennials? A lack of social programs?
I'm not saying that it's not, but I'm saying I could see why somebody who does not have as deep a connection with God and with the modern revelations of the prophet Joseph Smith and understand the importance thereof could mistake the behavior of the culture of the church as being dismissive towards any generation younger than the Gen Xers.
I think your point about the social programs is very important, actually. I think I grew up also with a single mother. And for me, those types of, the basketball, the softball, all those things were really important to me. And I always went to those. The softball was both men and young men. And then, they used to have the playoffs. We'd go into regionals and run through regions. My grandpa went all the way to Salt Lake when they used to do it all the way in the tournament, going all the way to Salt Lake.
It used to be broadcast on KSL. Literally Kentucky's, the Franklin, Kentucky 3rd Ward. If they won in regionals and ended up playing the Tacoma, Washington 17th Ward, they might meet in the middle in Salt Lake City.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That is freaking epic, dude. You know what I'm saying? And we don't have any of that crap now. And I just kind of feel like they used all the programs and they were so busy getting rich that anything to fight for the programs would be considered as noise. We don't want the noise. Noise bad, contention bad.
No, yeah, conflict bad. That's what it is. It's like too many fights happening in basketball, so we're going to get rid of it.
Yeah,
let's just figure out how to make it work.
Yeah,
exactly.
Help people actually have their opportunity to have conflict in a controlled environment, like the church ball, so that you can talk about it and actually become better people.
Yeah, by the way, this law is getting passed where they want to take away our 501c3 status in order to this. Yeah, we got to go fight it because it's important, because our tithing is actually a tax-exempt thing. And so it's sort of like, yes, you are going to have to contend for your faith. Contention will be part of your life. It's part of being a peculiar people. And instead of fighting, all of this ground was ceded perpetually, year after year, decade after decade, until it's kind of like, living in California. Each little 1% tax increase ultimately adds up to an unlivable, unaffordable place for young families. So what do? They leave to other states. There's no young families here. My wife says, well, this word's kind of like old. Where can we move to find other young families? I'm like, babe, this is California. They don't exist. And they're in Texas. They're in Arizona. They're in Idaho.
You're actually hitting on a point that I wanted to bring up as you were talking about this, when you say that it feels like a church by boomers for boomers. I think that totally depends on your ward, because my ward doesn't feel that way.
You're also in Utah, where it's much more affordable. Half of my stake, literally, if I go to Utah and post on Facebook, hey, who's here right now? Who's within 20 minutes of this pizza joint in Provo? I have more friends from my graduating class in the ward I grew up in high school in Utah right now than I do in my hometown.
That's why Utah's booming.
Yeah, it's why Utah's booming. And I look at that as a complete and total derivative of 40 years of silence and mistaking suburban niceness for kindness instead of contending over these issues. And it's not a defect of millennials when they finally say, you know what, enough of this. We got to move to Utah. It's too expensive here in California. In the same way that spiritually they say, you know what, enough of this. Too much smoke. I'm not equipped to handle all of this. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. I kind of, that's the impression that I've gotten. That's what I felt. I've liked your commentary on avoiding the spiral of silence. I feel that both of you may be speaking semantically slightly different about the similar ailment. And I'm wondering what you think about how we fix this. Because at the end of the day, we could sit here for another 20 minutes moaning about what's wrong with the church. But I want to know from one of the only guys your age that's got a podcast saying, hey, this is worth fighting for. Let's do it. You know what I'm saying? I want to know if we've identified the problem being the spiral of silence, like what is the fix? Like, how do we turn this ship around? Because if we don't, what are just all millennials just going to go inactive? Is it going to be me and Brad? You know what I'm saying? Like what? What are we doing here?
Yeah, I think, what I always tell people is you just have to act. You have to go talk. I mean, here's where the issues are really going to start coming. You either act now or you cede more ground, and then you have to act even more down the road, because you have, this is what's happening in your Sunday school class, in your fast and testimony meetings, in your elders quorum, in religious society, in young women's especially, where you get more and more of this identitarianism, LGBTQ issues, and pride flag, and critical race theory, and all anti-racism. All these things are starting to enter into the church at the stake and especially the ward levels. And I hear this all the time, over and over again across the U.S., right? And the issue is if you continue to cede ground on this culturally within your own surroundings, then we're all in trouble, because this isn't something that's going to stop. This wave is not going to stop.
Yeah.
And so you either, and it doesn't mean that you have to be contentious with this or angry at somebody. You can be very respectful as you speak up and step out of the spiral of silence. But
yeah.
You've got to speak up. Put your foot down on things. Talk about the family proclamation. What it is. Really interesting. I had my wife, who is like this total valiant member of the church, and I was giving a talk in another ward. This was just a month ago, and so I couldn't find somebody else. It was around Christmas time. So I had my wife come with me. And so she's speaking, and she loved me for that, of course. And so she goes and she gives this talk. And I didn't know what she was speaking on, actually. I didn't know what she was doing. But she spoke on the family proclamation. And so she sits down after she speaks. And, we've got the hymn, the intermediate hymn going on. And she sits down next to me and she says, you know what? I started thinking while I was speaking, what if I shouldn't be saying these things? What if I shouldn't say this thing? That started running through my mind, like people are going to be offended and I shouldn't say these things. And then she said immediately after, but what in the world am I thinking? Of course I'm going to say these things. Of course I'm going to stand by this. But see, that's the mentality that's starting to happen with the spiral of silence. It's like, oh, I don't want to offend anyone. Mm-hmm. We better not talk about this. So since I've got people that are offended by the family proclamation, let's just keep it quiet. If I'm bishop, you know what? Let's just not bring that topic up at all, so that we have harmony and no contention and no conflict going on. And you can see where that goes. Or how about LGBTQ issues now? Mm-hmm. Well, let's not bring that up at all, right? Let's not talk about these things because we don't want any problems. That is a massive contributor and going to be the primary contributor to increasing the spiral of silence right now.
Yeah. And I think a big part of the reason why it's difficult for people to figure out is in part because of the way that they approach it when they're actually talking about things that will bring conflict. It's difficult for them to do that in a way that is not contentious, right? It becomes difficult to say, okay, how do we approach this topic in a way that doesn't end in a fight? And I actually think the scriptures have a really killer answer for us. And I want to share that real fast. In D&C 121, 41 through 43, it says that no power or influence can or ought to be maintained by the virtue of the priesthood, only by persuasion, by long-suffering, by gentleness and meekness, and by love unfeigned. And I think the world is trying to redefine love unfeigned to mean like, you've got to agree with everything everyone else says, because if you're not supporting them completely, then you hate them, right? Love
Yes.
does not equal agreement.
But that's also the cry bullies have figured that out though.
Wait,
they figured out
this because then we can get back because
Okay.
everything that you're going to say applies to what's coming.
Okay,
next.
hit me.
So it says in 42, by kindness and pure knowledge, which shall greatly enlarge the soul without hypocrisy and without guile. And like you pointed out, Greg, kindness, not niceness, right? And then 43, I think, has the answer here. Reproving betimes with sharpness when moved upon by the Holy Ghost, and then showing forth afterwards an increase of love toward him whom thou hast reproved, lest he esteem thee to be his enemy. And I think we sometimes misinterpret reproving betimes with sharpness and think that means like reproving betimes like with a lot of force or like really hard or really viciously, when really reproving betimes with sharpness, I think, should be more understood as exactness. Reproving very specifically and speaking to the core of the issues that we're dealing with, and then showing forth an increase of love towards the people. I think that's how we do it with kindness. That's the answer to the problem of silence, is to follow what the scriptures say and to become very specific rather than avoiding the conflict, take it head on, but do it without contention. Reproving betimes with sharpness, exactness, and then showing an increase of love to people.
That's kind of like when somebody gives a really good church talk and you don't want to be the person that follows up afterwards. You know what I'm saying?
No, but what you were saying before, you were saying before, I think still applies. So go with that.
I actually was so taken in by what you were saying, I forgot what I was gonna say.
Oh,
but it's
Let me
okay
add then, Brad. I'll add to King Mosiah here.
because I've got a question I wrote down. But I mean, like that was like so good. I was like, well, crap. I guess my job here is done. This has been great. Subscribe to Quick Media, and we'll see you in the next program. You know what I'm saying? Like I was literally just ready to walk away from the sermon. But anyway, okay. So as you were saying, Greg, and then I got a question for you. Hit it, Greg. Continue.
Well, I was just saying, sharpness. Of course, you look at sharpness. That's the sword to me, right? The sword of truth, or the word.
Mm-hmm.
That's the sharpness is. Let me just bring the truth in here and talk about the truth. And then I'm not going to be angry at you. I'm going to talk about principles, and I'm going to talk about truth.
And
I don't need to make you my enemy by attacking your character or worrying about something other than the principle itself.
Yeah, and I think a cool thing about that, the way that swords are used symbolically, they are weapons that require a bit of finesse to use. You can't just go start whacking things. It's not the club of truth. It's the sword of truth, because you're not just using it to whack on people and then they're going to get it. You need to use it correctly. Otherwise, it's not going to end well for you. It's not going to end well for them. It just prolongs the conflict as neither of you reaches your goals.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I like clubs. So, in fact, in the Joseph Smith translation, no, I'm just kidding.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, right.
Okay. So, I do have a question for you. Okay. So we kind of ID the problem. Do you feel like it's getting better, or do you feel like it's getting worse? Or do you feel like it has to get worse before it gets better?
I think
are
that
Mormons learning their lesson, or are we just at the end of the caboose of a train, like the end of Tremors, where the tremor is like going through the mountain and it's about to just boom, blow out, chasing Kevin Bacon? You know what I'm saying? Like I don't know. What do you think, man?
I think that I do get a lot of feedback from people that say, hey, I finally said this, I went over this, and of course that worries me a little bit, but I'm still going to not be silenced, right? But I do think overall it's getting worse. I think it's
Really?
and here's why. Because one of you two brought up the idea of love.
Okay.
And this is what is becoming another stifling point of the gospel, because people are conflating love with tolerance. Mm-hmm. They're conflating love with some corrupted view of compassion. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so, it's teddy bear Jesus, right? Jesus is teddy bear Jesus. And didn't he go around and give love to everybody? And, that's what's starting to happen with the term love. Yeah. Love means I'm going to go along with you being you, your postmodern idea of truth and this non-objective truth, and whatever you feel is what is right, and whatever you feel is true, and I'm going to go along with that because I love you and I am compassionate for you. The problem is that's not love.
And
that's just not love, right? That is, again, a short-term type of answer, again, like conflict, like how you create more conflict. Love, the pure love of Christ is charity, right? Charity rejoiceth not in iniquity. And charity is what I would say about charity. Charity is, it's caring and acting for someone's long-term, eternal well-being. And unless you have that in mind, and you're just trying to be nice and tolerant, you're not taking on the example of Jesus Christ, if that's the case.
And in fact, I think Jesus gives us the perfect example of this. And it's one of my favorite examples in the scriptures because so many people really ruin it by taking half of the phrase. When Christ says to the women caught in adultery, neither do I condemn thee, go thy way and sin no more. I feel like half of the world right now is like, neither do I condemn thee, neither do I condemn thee. Full stop. And that is what you're talking about, Greg.
Yeah, adultery is just fine. I don't condemn you.
Exactly.
Right.
But for her long-term benefit, go thy way and sin no more is what she needs to hear. That's how Christ loved her. He also didn't say, you suck, now go thy way and sin no more. Like he said, no, neither do I condemn thee, right? And so we have those two conflicting sides, I think, where I think the louder one right now is the neither do I condemn thee and it's over. When really we need that balance of neither do I condemn thee, go thy way and sin no more. That's how we love each other as Christ loved us.
Wow, Brad, I've never seen you be the interrupting cow on this one.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's great. He's getting stoked. He's jumping right in. He's like writing notes. Like I can't hold him back. I'm like, whoa. So I'm a little bit nihilist on this one, right? You know what I'm saying? I think there's sometimes where I swear, it's interesting to say you think it's getting worse. I kind of wonder, how do we turn this ship around? Because if we don't, it's terminal. You know what I'm saying? And there's sometimes in my cynical days. I
disagree.
Oh, well, hold on. Let me get it out. All right. Hey, ever seen that movie Home? Where they say, knock, knock, who's there? And he says, interrupting.
Yeah.
You know, it's interrupting cow. It's kind of funny. Great joke. It was my daughter's first knock, knock joke. So anyway, they say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And sometimes I just feel until all of the just seniority-based business model of the church
the boomers
just died. No, it's Gen Xers too. You're not off the hook. No, I'm just kidding. But no, I really do feel people ask me sometimes like, well, is there any doubts that you have? And I say, yeah, I doubt the revelation of creating a seniority-based leadership model in our church, because in our most explosive growth years, we were led by generally a very eclectic group of leaders. We had some old leaders in the 12 apostles, but we also had some 24-year-olds. You know what I'm saying? And I think when you have that mix, it's good. But right now, I mean, we have all but a geriatric leadership model. And you can't tell me that anybody that was born with their formative first 40 years pre-internet is well equipped to understand the world as it is now in 2023. So much has changed. And that's not anti-elitist. That's not ageist. It's just recognizing this is a unique time in history when the Gutenberg press, I meant the internet, was developed, and it did more faster in a shorter period of time than the previous 50 years before it, than the previous 150 years before that, all the way back to the Industrial Revolution and honestly, the creation of the printing press. So it's like, I sometimes, when I get cynical, I think like I don't think it's going to be able to get good for another 15 years. You know what I'm saying?
Did you say 15, 1-5?
1-5. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Because we've called for the second time around the same young men's president that was young men's president 23 years ago. And, you know, it doesn't work. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't work. So I don't know. How do we right this ship? They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but we recycle the same leadership year after year. For heaven's sakes, I think 50% of the apostles that were apostles within 4 or 5 years of me being born are still apostles now. You know what I'm saying? I'd estimate over 50% of the apostles that were apostles in 1989 are apostles now. You know what I'm saying? Like how, if the spiral of silence is probably the biggest contributor to that 82% that are leaving, how do we turn this around? How do we make it better?
Boy, I got to walk a tightrope here.
All those 65 plus come follow me listeners of yours are listening, bro. Watch out, man.
Yeah. So I think that here's what let me just say what I sense, right? This is what I sense, that people react and rally to a point. That can be a banner, like the title of liberty. That can be whatever. It can be a phrase. It can be a stance that is made.
Like ponderize.
Right? It's like, okay, well, I need stances. I need stances to rally around. If you look at what happened with Captain Moroni, I mean, he's out there putting this, this is what's going to happen, and I've got this banner, and everybody finally says okay, because they're not at first, right? They're not just, okay, let's just go. Let's go fight. But they end up rallying around him because they're rallying to a point, and they're rallying what's on the banner, what's on the title. And I feel like we are missing right now those stances. I feel like we are missing those titles. I feel that is something that draws especially men in the church. That is something that says, look, we are rallying to this. And that has become to me in the last 30 years something that has become more and more vague, especially when you have more and more of the mists of darkness that are encroaching in on the iron rod. And it's like, okay, well, wait a minute here. I can see a little bit of light with this philosophy. There's a little bit, but it's kind of nebulous here. Do I follow through on this? Well, you've got to have a rallying cry, more of a rallying cry that's consistent to create action.
It's kind of funny you say that because I just got a book off eBay.
Uh-oh.
It's an originally signed copy by Ezra Taft Benson. I got his signature. It's kind of cool. But the book is titled, I didn't even know this book existed, The Red Carpet, Socialism, The Royal Road to Communism. You talk about stances. Wow. You know what I'm saying? Our prophet straight up wrote a book calling out socialism, the royal road to communism. Nowadays, with your spiral of silence, it's like, oh, well, no, there might be some good people who sometimes have kind of some socialist views that we think because they call it the social gospel. And we can't talk about that in Elders Quorum. No. You know what I'm saying? In fact, if you take a hard stance, what's interesting, I see this in our comments, and I want to know if you get this in your comments too. I get lots of emails from young men who say, why won't the church defend us? I was asked for my sociology class to talk about, okay, why do I think maybe an upcoming bill is bad? And I got up and I said, I believe gender is eternal, for example. And people need coping mechanisms and need to be loved if they feel they're in the wrong body and all that other stuff and so on and so forth. But gender is eternal and it shouldn't be messed with. It should be loved and celebrated. And if you have a problem with yourself, I want to help you develop coping mechanisms and love you. But I don't think our society should adopt this measure AB 17B in Nebraska or whatever. Some poor kid in high school goes up, gives a talk. Not a talk, but his point of view for his debate class or whatever gets lambasted, of course, by the administration, thrown under the bus, and then nobody comes up and says no, yeah, that's actually what we believe. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. The church will actually write an official press release saying, well, though that may be official doctrine, we don't believe the way that he said it was loving and inclusive and yet, and they'll neuter it with euphemisms from corporate America that have been adopted into the nomenclature of the church.
Is that what they did?
That's the PR department.
Yeah, or the PR department.
Is that what they did? Or
oh, yeah. You know what I'm saying? I've gotten probably 2 or 3 of these kids. Now, of course, I'm truncating the story and probably butchering it. You know what I'm saying? Just for the sake of time. But it's like, I get so many comments from people saying, why won't the church defend us? Like my older brother's got to go to Boy Scouts. The church said that there was going to be a new Boy Scouts. Now there's no replacement for the Boy Scouts. We're graduating our second generation now of young men that grew up without the Boy Scouts. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? And it's just like there's this big sense of loss felt amongst the younger people.
Absolutely.
And they're wondering, like, I've literally, unironically, this is a question I've been asked multiple times. This exact sentence. Have the brethren given up on North America? Only somebody driven so far by the spiral of silence can ask that question. You know what I'm saying?
I'm confused by this entire line from both of you guys about how the leadership of the church is somehow not doing what they ought to be, when I feel like we have.
I didn't say that. I said I'm looking for stances, and here let me I'm going to interrupt you this time really quick because I want to say this.
Yeah,
well, look at the Respect for Marriage Act.
Yeah.
Okay, you got the Respect for Marriage Act. This is President Oak's baby. He's working that through. He supports the bill and pushes that through. And the language in the press release that's given there is incredibly supportive of same-sex marriage outside of the church, right? So when you have been brought up in the church and you have understood that is against our doctrine, and I'm not saying it's the wrong thing. I don't understand it, but maybe it's the right thing, and something down the road it's going to be incredibly important for us. Great. But there's no communication on it. And so I've got people asking me all the time, kind of like what Cardin is saying, is like, what is going on? Mm-hmm. What do I don't understand what this means. But there's no communication. There's nothing that what they used to do in the older days is they would have had the bishops read a letter on this, clarifying what they're doing from the pulpit in the ward. Right. And it's like, well, but there's nothing. The press release is not to the members. The press release is to the world. Mm-hmm. Right. What is the communication to the world? That's what I'm kind of saying. There's not. I totally trust the brethren. I totally trust where they're going. I totally support them. I'm just wondering, where's the communication on these types of issues?
Yeah, I guess I just don't have the expectation of that, maybe. And maybe that's where part of
Moses
the disconnect
tells you, we're going to start walking north until we find a land of promise that I can't define.
Yeah.
Even though there's a giant sea between us and this land, I don't think they're unreasonable if there was a couple of Jews that are like, could you run that by me again? I mean, like, how are we going to do this, Moses?
Go reread the story of the 12 spies sent into the land of Israel and come back and talk to me about that.
Look, okay, and this is why you're going to heaven and you're Apostle 2027, all right?
No.
But for the other, for the amoebas down here that hang out with me and Greg Matsen, you know what I'm saying?
No.
I just sense, I guess I can't say exactly what it is, and so I'm reluctant to, because you'll just get canceled if you call it the wrong thing immediately. But I think there is a feeling amongst a growing amount of people that something is not right here. And the church that I grew up in, with the strong stances and identity that I believe was righteously inculcated in me, is not the same church I am operating in now. And I both miss it for myself personally and want that to be the church that I teach to my children. But I don't feel I can do that with the mechanisms now, through either lack of adaptation to modernity or just mistaking suburban niceness for kindness, and an avoidance of conflict so thick that now you can't talk about anything controversial, which means your opponents always win. And I don't believe that turning the other cheek is a death sentence to losing every single argument and conflict you engage in. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I agree with that.
It doesn't feel right to people. And I can say that sometimes I identify with that, and I understand. I see why the millennials are leaving. I think it sucks. I think it's cynical. I think sometimes they want to be secular. Sometimes they want to sin. I think there's a lot of dishonesty involved. And so we do our debunkings to take away the excuse, at least, and hopefully put people in a position where they can be more honest with themselves and us about why they're leaving. But, I wish we were stronger so that it didn't happen so often. And I think if we were, it wouldn't. That's all.
I just feel like the majority of what I'm hearing from you guys right now is expressing a desire for things to be done differently by higher ups when I feel like the right thing is for us to be taking personal responsibility for revelation in our own lives. And that this is far more solved on a local level with us in our own families, in our own wards, than it is by anything else.
Well, then
outside.
riddle me this. Tell me what I should do here, for example.
Yeah.
I was singing in the choir. I don't like the fact that half of my ward has moved away and they're dissolving wards left and right and dissolving stakes, actually. They're probably going to dissolve both of our stakes. And I thought, you know what? Our music could get better here. And I'm a musician and I could help that. In fact, there's no mechanism in the church that requires all the people in the choir be ward members. You know what I'm saying? Why don't we make like some cool flyers and just invite members of the community to come sing in the Los Angeles 17th Ward's choir? You know what I'm saying? And who knows, maybe we'll get 50 or 60 people here that once a month come and sing with us. It'll better the music. It'll be an outreach program. It'll be awesome. I know from my business endeavors that for less than $2,000, I can get 10,000 flyers printed and delivered and executed. Yeah, well, the thing is, I don't control the budget of the church. I'm not one of the super wealthy boomers. Boomers controlled pre-COVID, okay, 82% of the wealth of America. It went up to like, millennial wealth went up from controlling 18% to almost 9%. We are
because they're so awesome. That's because they're so awesome.
Yeah, like all of the lockdown measures
benefited boomers
that we engaged in.
Yeah,
especially in California. I was kept out of church for nearly 18 months. And that was not for the benefit of me and my children. That wasn't for the religious education of my daughter and my son. That was to protect the boomers that still believe CNN. You know what I'm saying? It's like I don't run the show. I've never been asked to give a talk in church.
Mm-hmm.
Yet I've watched the same 15 people give talks at church. Actually, that's not true. I was asked once in New York and I had to fill in for somebody and it was by a bishop who was in his 30s. You know what I'm saying? But it's like, I'm not
That's
part of...
That's odd. That's odd.
Have you ever...
you'd think how outspoken and faithful I am that I'd probably ask me all the time, right? But no joke. Literally, like, no, I never get asked to ask a church. It's hilarious. I've been in my ward for... I've been in the same house that I moved into like 4 years ago. I had to give a talk when I moved in. I take it back. I'm sorry. I've given 2 of those, like there's a new family in the ward and you have to give a talk and they give you 5 minutes to just introduce yourself, tell the story, how you met your wife, bear your testimony and leave. I've done that thing, but I've never really effectively been asked to just like give a church talk. After leaving the hospital with my wife, we were asked to do a fireside for some young adults, which was kind of cool once. But like just, I think the biggest church calling I ever had was I teach elders quorum now. You know what I'm saying? Like that's it. But it's like, and they look at me like I'm one of the young bucks. You know what I'm saying? It's like, dude, I'm freaking nearly 40. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're looking at me as one of the young bucks, there's a problem here. You know, and so that's just how I feel. It's not something I want to feel. You know what I'm saying? But it's like, that's what I feel.
Yeah.
And so I kind of understand when people are like, well, if I miss a couple Sundays, they won't miss me. And then that just leads to either inactivity at best or anti-Mormonism at worst.
Yeah, but that's such a, I don't know, that attitude to me is wrong. That attitude is something where you're expecting other people to change in order for your life to get better, which is just never going to happen.
No, I'm still here, bro. Half the reason I started my podcast is because I have an internal locus of control. Half the reason why Greg started his podcast is because he's like, hey, dude, I ain't going down with a fight. So trust me, it's like we're all here because we believe in action. We're all here because we understand you have to contend for the faith. All of this, I say, present company excluded. But whether we like it or not, we are part of our people. And I think our people have a bad, just not attitude, but just we're not doing it right now. I just feel that way. And I'm sorry to be such a downer.
I think you've just adopted the language of your oppressors, Carden. when you start going that direction and say like, hey, here's what other people should be doing, there's no way that ends well.
Well, I'm not necessarily, I believe in all of that. I'm saying when somebody says they feel that way, I can kind of see where they're coming from. That's all.
Yeah, I get back to what Brad, what you're saying there. Two things. One, on talking about the church or about the church culture, I think that what you do with your podcast here is talking about your opinions and putting those out into the ether.
Agreed. Yeah.
right? So it's not just like you're sitting at home isolated with your family saying, well, we're just going to be ourselves and we're not going to put anything out there, right? So I think you do that. I think you do talk about things and how we need to have kindness instead of niceness and et cetera, right? So there's too much niceness and you need more kindness. But I'm back to your point about, self-responsibility. I think that is one of the problems of the spiral of silence is that we, as you said, we do not have enough personal responsibility. I am going to guess, this is a little bit of an educated guess, but I'm going to guess that is one of the strategic tacts of the brethren, in that they're saying we're pulling back on some of these areas because you, the membership, in order for us to make it, you better become stronger, and you better stand up, and you better start figuring this out a little bit more without us telling you, as we're told that we can't do, to being compelled to do told to do every little thing, right? That we need to take action ourselves. And so I think that's one of the problems. The problem with that is that I don't think we're prepared for that as a church, because we are like this spiral of silence. We're like the epitome of the spiral of silence. So I don't think that I can see that if that is the tack they're taking, how that's the right thing. Because I'm big on personal responsibility also. I just don't know how prepared and ready we are for it, or enough being told that that's where we're moving toward. But because we are so much dependent on the brethren, so dependent on even programs, so dependent on being told what to do all the time, that's one of the biggest issues with the spiral of silence, because you're like, well, wait a minute, I'm supposed to hold off until I'm told what to do.
Here's my suggestion.
I don't want to say anything because the bishop didn't tell me what to do yet. I don't want to say anything because the prophet didn't say anything yet. I get that all the time. Did the prophet say this, Greg? Did the prophet tell you to do this?
And I think that's the wrong attitude, right?
Here's
I'm
my
way more
attitude.
of the opinion you ask forgiveness instead of permission.
I've got a much better system.
That's the whole essence of the gospel.
I've got a much better system. We need to create a universal, I'm a huge UBI advocate, all right? So we need to create a universal spiritual system where we are told exactly what to do, so we all qualify to make it back to heaven. And when we get there, I want it to be called Cardin's Awesome System, and we will all celebrate, and the glory be mine. And I'm fine with that. You know what I'm saying? I'm fine with that. And I'll say Greg Matsen had something to do with it too.
No.
You know what I'm saying? He has something to do with it too. No, that's funny. No. Okay.
Because I think you guys are bringing up very valid things. Especially generationally, it's surprising to see the differences here. Because I still had the Scouts program, went through, got my Eagle and everything, all of that. But I don't miss it. Maybe I'm just not.
That's because you're Canadian. You grew up with trees. You didn't have to learn how to tie knots. That's how you made your bed frame.
You guys are born Scouts. Brad, you're born Scouts.
Yeah, dude. Okay,
but I just feel like I don't know. When it comes down to it, I feel like the keys that we have here with what is happening in the church right now, there's a bit of a sifting happening anyway, right? Okay. And it's important for us to be doing everything that we can to do what we can to take care of ourselves, our families, and everyone else around us insofar as we can. Yeah, and anyone who does want to be helped, because some people don't want to be, or they don't view your love and care for them as help, and sometimes we just have to accept that.
Yeah, I think that'd be a fun job when we're in heaven. I want to get that calling. We're just somebody's sitting there at the sifter, and you could be like, yeah, no, you didn't make it.
Sorting out.
As if that's how it happens.
I'm totally just kidding.
But
okay, so Greg, we got a jam now. We've taken enough of your time. Where can people find you? How can they follow you? You're a cool guy. I follow his show. I listen to his show, and I'm driving out and about, and I'm working. You know what I'm saying? So
it's really good.
Yeah. Where can people find you? How can they listen to you? How can they reach out to you? The whole 9 yards.
Well, on audio, you can find me at Quick Media on any of the podcast platforms that you are used to using. And then you can go to YouTube and you can find Quick Media there as well. And of course, you can go to our website where we've got a lot of other information and things written at quickmedia.com.
Okay, cool. And the only suggestion I would have is okay, so like I was in this elders quorum once where when they introduced people, like they would all just like say their name with like a hoorah. Like, so somebody would be like, hi, what's going on? Yeah, this is my dad. Yeah, his name's Harold. And the whole elders quorum would go like, Harold. And it was like kind of cool. You know what I'm saying? It was pretty rad to have like, 17 guys be like, Harold. It was actually kind of cool, right? It was like this little fun thing that we did, right? So I think from here on out, when you say quick media, you have to be like, quick media. Like we got to give you some kind of cool, like zinger, like, ba, ba, ba. Like the Quick and the Dead or something, with a Western and a Charles Bronson outfit.
And
yes, absolutely.
And like a graphic of postmodernism being put in flames behind
yeah, exactly. It'll be
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be that would be utterly based. I would like totally dig that. That's pretty bussin'. So okay, cool. So anyway, quick media, ladies and gentlemen, let us know where we go wrong in the comments. If we're just a bunch of cynical bozos, let us know. If we're just being a bunch of, sour pusses, tell us where we go wrong. This is Midnight Mormons. We'll see you guys in the next program.